Hey, I'm JD Hagler with Aux'Arc Climbing, and we're going to talk today a little bit about building your home wall. With everybody kind of in quarantine right now and isolating there at home, no one's getting to the gym and they're all trying to figure out options for building something at home. And most people don't know where to start. They don't have any construction experience behind them. They don't really have any idea what they're doing. But they're doing the research and they're trying to find out, and that's great. So I just want to give them a place to start, getting into it. So the things to be aware of getting in, space, the supplies and the tools. We're going to talk about that real quick. We're actually going to start with the tools because I think people just hop right into whether they can build one with the space and if they've got the, how much supplies are going to cost. If you don't have the tools already, that's where the majority of your cost is going to be, I think. And I think the tools are good to invest in because you're going to use them later, especially if you get into your DIY projects. But let's talk tools real quick. So everything from the level over, I think, are essential products, and we'll talk about them in turn here, and then we'll hit the hardware real quick as well. Most important tool I think you're going to need is a circular saw. Circular saw, corded or cordless, doesn't matter. This is what you're going to do the majority of your cuts on your 2x4s and your plywood with. This can do almost everything. The only thing that it can't do is a couple of shortcuts, or let's say you have to put an outlet into the wall or cut around a joist like I have up top where you can't see it the second. The Jigsaw is really good for that, and the circular saw kind of struggles with it. So as long as you don't have any kind of odd cuts to make, circular saw should cut it. The other thing you need that's going to cost the most money is going to be a drill. The thing to keep in mind with the drill, my preferred drill is that impact right there. The only reason I can't use my impact for every single piece of drill work that has to be done is because of the holes needed for T-nuts. So be sure that your drill can chuck up to a half-inch bit. If your impact or whatever your preferred drill is has a way to get up to a half-inch bit, then great, use it. But make sure whatever drill you have can get up to that bit. This is the only drill I own out of the three that can get up to that size of a bit. So that's why I have this one included. Otherwise, it'd be that one. And you need a bit that large for your T-nut collar. Everything else you can do is smaller bits. But for the T-nut collar, that hole where it pokes through the wood and your bolt goes, you've got to have about a max of half-inch bit. So, and then everything else is kind of cheap after that. Sawhorses are cheap. You need a pair of those so you can get your wood up off the ground and work. You need drill bits. So I've got a half-inch bit, and then I've got for my different screws, I've got anywhere from an 1/8 inch to 5/32, stuff like that. I would just recommend getting a box that's got all of them, accessible. It's pretty cheap to do it that way. It's probably the cheapest way to do it, unless you know exactly the bits that you need. So that's what I would do there. Measuring tape for the obvious reasons after I throw it. A square or a triangle. I prefer a triangle because it's going to give you the angles on what you're cutting. But you're going to use this for your straight lines on your 2x4s and all this, etc., etc. I mark it with a pen and pencil, things like that. Level's pretty important. You can probably get away with a 2-footer, but this is a 4-footer, and it's really good for projects like these, especially like this bottom length here. The bottom side, the very bottom edge of it actually has a slant to it. It's like 18.5 inches on one side and 17.5 on the other, but the top is level. And I use that 4-foot level to do that. Make sure it was level there, meant everything else going forward was pretty level, but you can always check it and modify it as needed with that level. Bits that I've got here, let's see, I got some hardware here that's obviously the T-nuts. I'm doing about 80 T-nuts per sheet of plywood, so I've got 3 sheets of plywood here, 4x8 each. I ran low, so I don't have as many T-nuts as I'd like, but ideally you're looking at about 75 to 80 T-nuts per sheet on an 8-inch spread. I didn't mind triangular. It might be less if you do like a square pattern. So, but you gamble on about 60 to 80 T-nuts per sheet. You can get 100 of these T-nuts from Amazon for like $12. I think that's even prime. Escape sells some really good ones that have got holes in them that you can drill instead of just hammering them in, which you'll need a hammer for, by the way. I don't think I have my hammer out here at the second, but you'll need a hammer to drive these in if you go this route. For as big as my wall is, I'm just going to do a bunch of T-nuts and then replace, or a bunch of the cheap T-nuts, and then replace them as necessary with the nicer ones. That way I'm only using the nice ones in like high traffic areas on this wall. Other hardware you're going to want, I've got 3 different sizes of screws here. I've got I got 3.5 inches, I think, or 4s. These are 4-inch screws. These are 2.5-inch screws, and these are 2-inch screws. So my 4-inch screws are for going into the long ends of my 2x4s. You know, going through the widest part of the board. That's what I'm going through with these. 3.5 to 4 inches for those. When you're going through the narrower part of the 2x4, this 2.5-inch, it works out real well. And then I've got these 2 inchers. Now, I've got some 1 3/4 that would work out really well. They'd be just fine. I'm using all of these for putting on the plywood. Make sure I get a bunch of grip, since that's really where the weight's going to be, is on the plywood. So these are 2 inches, 1 3/4 work just fine. These are also the hex or star, or what I call a torque bit. That's kind of nice, unless you really crank on it. But that's mainly it for hardware, honestly. T-nuts, 2-inch screws, 2.5-inch screws, and 4-inch screws. Some optional tools that I really like. This is my impact right here, and I love this thing. So this impact is what I would do all my work with, except for that 1 or 1/2 inch bit right there. This thing is amazing. It's got the power to just drive about anything. I do all my pilot holes with it. So you can quick disconnect that stuff in there. It'll drill your pilot hole. It'll even countersink that bit. It's all right there. You can pop it out. You can throw your bit in for your screw. And off you go. I love this thing. This is the #1 tool I own. For those of you that don't know what a pilot hole is, what I'm talking about, a pilot hole is what removes the wood from where you're going to screw. You want to remove the wood, the majority of it, where that shaft is going to sit, because that shaft will split the wood when you drive it in there. You want to remove wood about equal to the shaft of the screw, but you still want to have enough wood in there that the threads purchase it. So this drill bit needs to be smaller than the threads of the screw, but about the same size as the shaft of it, okay? So that's what a pilot hole is. And if you don't use one, you will split your 2x4s. They're dried pine most of the time, and they will split very easily. You'd be surprised. So keep that in mind. And like for the 4 inchers, my pilot hole doesn't generally go their whole length, but it goes deep enough. This one's not what I would use for it, but it goes deep enough that they don't split the wood. So just something to keep in mind there. But this impact does all of it. I love it, except for this bit. I'm sure there's an adapter out there somewhere. I just don't have it. This jigsaw I talked about a little bit earlier. This is what you do all the kind of the funky cuts with. That's about it. You know, I don't even think I can cut 2x4s with it. It's pretty close, but it just won't do it. But it's nice to have on hand. And then I've got a little sander. You know, sometimes this board gets roughed up when you drill holes through it, or you find kind of a rough spot, and you can just hit with the sander, and it's nice. I don't think it's required, but it's probably not a bad idea. Otherwise, you can just get a thing of sandpaper and do it by hand. Nothing crazy. So those are the tools that I think are required, and a couple that I really like having on hand but aren't essential. So let's talk a little bit about the space needed for your wall. So a little bit about space in your wall, okay? So people are trying to figure out, do they want to go inside or outside with it? So there's a couple ways to do that. If you're going outside, then a lot of the structural problems are so much easier to solve, because you're the one building the structure. You're the one that's going to do the whole thing. So you could drive in 4x4 posts, you can concrete, you can do whatever you want to do. Super easy to build an outside wall. If you want to build a little more mobile, folding outside wall, something that's not too hard, Climber Dad's got a great video where he talks about building a freestanding kind of folding systems board. So that's where I would go for that. That's some great information. For building into an existing space, you kind of need to know some numbers there. So for an 8-foot roof or an 8-foot ceiling, which is what most rooms have, you're going to look at let's go off of this is a 8 wide by 12 feet in climbing distance. Not 12 foot tall. This is a 10-foot ceiling. It's 12 feet in climbing. That's going to be tough to stick in an 8-foot ceiling, okay? Let's say you give yourself a foot for your bottom board there, your kickboard. Say you give yourself a foot, so you've got 11 feet of climbing area that you want to put in there. That's going to require a 50-degree angle in an 8-foot ceiling. That's really steep. That's pretty tough. So you could cut the climbing wall back to 8 feet, and now you're talking like 38, 40 degrees for a roof. And that's not bad. That will get you about here for your climbing area. So all you can really do on that is bounce around in the same spot and try some different moves, but you can't really get a route into it. It's gonna be very tough, and everything's gonna be a sit start. So things to consider. It's still better than nothing, and a lot of people are doing it, but be aware of it. Now, if you've got a 10-foot ceiling, you've got all kinds of room in the world. This is 10 foot, 38-degree wall. Really happy with it. That's why most people build in their garage, where the joists are exposed and they don't have to worry about going into the ceiling of their house or going into the floor above it if it's a 2-story house, things like that. So be aware of that. Those things to keep in mind. I would probably pull the plywood or the drywall down behind it, so you know what you're working with behind there. Power, water lines, etc., etc. Be aware of the joists. Make sure you're drilling into the joists. Make sure you're drilling into the studs of the wall. Don't just drill through the drywall. I would hope that wouldn't need to be said, but just in case, make sure you know your studs are. Make sure you're hitting with 4-inch screws, etc., etc. Don't just screw it to the wall and hope it's good. As far as construction supplies, this is 3/4-inch plywood. Do not use MDF. Do not use particle board. MDF is basically wood dust that's been compressed together and glued. That's it. The first time it gets wet, any kind of moisture whatsoever, you spit on the wall, you're losing so much structural integrity. Particle board is kind of the same way. Particle board is just compressed scraps of wood and glued. There's no support all the way across the board either direction. Plywood gets its name from plies that run perpendicular to each other. So this layer runs this way, the layer behind this runs that way, etc., etc. And it runs the whole distance. Everything is, the grain goes from the bottom of the tops, same piece of wood, and it's all glued. These are so strong. It's ridiculous what a 3/4-inch plywood or piece of plywood can do. So definitely go with this. And I wouldn't do 1/2-inch ply. I would do at least 3/4. Some people can do 5/8. 3/4 does pretty well. This is also just a construction grade. I can sand down any issues I have with this, but if you don't want to sand or you really want the nice finish, then you can spend a little bit more on the plywood. This is $26 a sheet. You could bump it up to $30 or $40 a sheet and get nicer grade plywood if you wanted to. It doesn't bother me. So I've got 3 sheets of plywood. I've got 5 or 6 12-foot 2x4s behind here, and 5 or 6 2x8s or 2x4 8-footers back here. And that's really it. I think I've got $130 in wood, and then probably another 10 or 15 in probably more than that, probably 20 in hardware. Well, heart and screws. I've got 12 in T-nuts per 100, so I've got another 30 in T-nuts probably. So you're probably looking at about $170, $200 altogether, somewhere in there, depending on how much you already have. 1 box of screws of each size was more than enough for everything I've done here, so I don't worry about that. So this is my wall. Obviously, these are the volumes that I've built. These are the holes that I've cast, all that stuff. So I've tried to keep it fairly budget. I know there are some people that have some concerns about building an overhanging wall. Highly encourage it. Okay, if you just do a face climb against the wall, you're going to lose so much climbing distance. And on top of that, because you have access to the wall every day, because it's in your backyard or it's in your basement, you're going to climb on it all the time, and you're going to grow as a climber so fast, and you're going to outpace that flat wall. All you can do is get smaller holds and space them further apart. There ain't a whole lot of things you can do to a face climbing wall. And you don't have any climbing distance, and it doesn't work. You will outgrow it very quickly, and it's not going to train you anymore. It's not going to develop anything anymore. With an overhanging wall, it's going to be tough at first. I hate overhanging walls. I really despise them, but I'm going to get better at it, and I'm going to get better at it because I have access to it every day. Things to get you around it at first: jugs. Start off with a lot of jugs. Sounds easy. Maybe you're a 5'10" climber and you don't like jugs. On an overhanging wall, that's where your 5'10s are using is jugs. Volumes. I've got a bunch of edges and crimps that I can't use on the face, but if I've got volumes, I can bump those numbers out real well. So I'm going to make a bunch of volumes. I've got 2 right now. I've got the wood for a half dozen more that I'm going to make today. Get volumes, put volumes on the wall, and you can use cheaper, smaller holes without buying the big jugs and spend the money on them. So there's ways around it. I would highly encourage you doing a wall overhanging rather than just some face climbing, all right? So, and then I'm going to put more wall up through here, and I'll have a little bit of face climbing, but it's going to be extra compared to what I could have. So let's look at construction a little bit. So I'm gonna look at the whole wall. Here's my kickboard. And then this guy comes up and ties into the ceiling up there at the peak. So I went from floor to peak, all right? And then I was happy to have lighting there. This is some of the jigsaw work I had to do. Right here, you can see where I had to cut around that. So that wasn't too bad. But that's where the jigsaw was much better for it than the circular saw. All right, so let's look at the base of the kick plate here. On this kick plate, this is basically a 2x4 box that I built. And I screwed directly to the joists, okay? And it's sitting on the ground, screwed to the joists. All of my 2x4s that run the length of the wall are sitting on this frame, okay? If I just had a pair of 4-inch screws or 3 4-inch screws tying it to the joist or the stud behind here, get my camera on it, those screws would not be able to support the sliding weight of this wall, all right? They're not designed for that. They can tie it to this, but they can't handle that perpendicular weight, all right? They're not gonna handle the load-bearing pressure of that perpendicular weight sliding down the wall. That's where this kickboard structure sits here, and it's great. It's holding most of the weight of the wall, sitting on top of it, and the screws are holding it in. It's most of the pressure of this wall is sitting right here in this point, all the way down. Make sure that you've taken that into account, okay? You can't just screw it to the wall and assume it's all gonna work. It might for a while, but eventually it's gonna cost you. And I don't want people staying safe and staying home away from COVID-19 only to have the wall fall on them, all right? It don't make a whole lot of sense. So be aware of your load bearing. All right, let me get my flashlight out. You look up in the top here, and I've got my joists up top are about 32 inches apart. They're not lined up with my studs, which are 2 feet apart, all right, 24 inches. So that was kind of a concern. I thought about building a whole substructure, but that was going to cost a bunch of money, and it was just more points of failure. So I wanted to tie directly into the studs, and so I stuck with a 2-foot spacing pattern, all right? So as you can see, we're sitting on the kickboard, and then every 2 foot, we have a stud that's tied in to that stud there, all right? Everything's tied in. It's got 2 screws that come in from the bottom going that way, and then it's usually got 1 that goes in diagonal. So I've got like 3 in there. And that comes up and goes up to the roof. Now the roof, because it had a different joist pattern that's at 32 inches, I've got 2 2x4s that run the whole width of the wall that are all tied in. On every single joist, there's 2 4-inch screws holding that 2x4 up, plus a whole bunch over in that corner. And then I've got these 2x4s screwed into the top up there. Okay, that's the base. That's most of the weight, the load bearing up there, and then most of it's down here. I'm not a civil engineer. I'm gonna guess probably 60-65% of the weight is being held right here, maybe more. And then everything out front is gonna be up there. Everything's secured up there. On top of that, to keep these 2x4s from moving left or right too much, I have a 2x4 8-footer going all the way across that's screwed in, and that keeps it from shifting side to side. And then I've got some hangers tying it back into the joists again, just to be sure. These are probably doing the least amount of work in the whole process, but they are there, and they make me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Down here, I've got a horizontal piece that I use that level for again, and that's going on every stud. These are where those 2.5-inch screws are in right here, going face to face. Down there's the 4-inchers, up here's the 2.5-inchers, all right? And they're on the other side of this coming in. Those go all the way back, and again, they just tie it back to the wall, and they let me put a nice little storage shelf up there where I keep my bouldering pad and my box of holds and all that good stuff. And then I got some leftover wood I'm gonna build volumes out of too. Yay! So that's how I did that. All right, and this has been really reliable. I've been really happy with it. I've bounced on this wall quite a bit, and it's been great. A couple of quick notes when we talk about construction here. Let's see if I can roll this camera out a little bit. These are spaced quite a bit apart. They're about 8 inches width, but I think I've got like 16 inches between them down here. I'm going to come back in and add more T-nuts as I have it. I got to order some more because I didn't have enough to begin with. But that'll be really easy to do because I have that shelf in the back. And that's one of the nice things about you're going to inevitably cross thread a T-nut. That shelf in the back means I can hop up there and work on it. I can work on everything above this point, which is really nice, since that's where most of my problems are going to be, is from here up. So that's something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind is that when you measure out your spacing for your T-nuts, if you just do a normal 8 to 8 inch, 16 inch center, whatever you do, you're gonna have a line that goes down the middle of it. Well, guess what your studs do on the back side? They go down the middle of it. So you see these holes here where they've been realigned over? Well, that's because there's a stud sitting right here, and there's a whole row of T-nuts I couldn't use. It was kind of dumb. So make sure you're thinking about that before you drill all those holes and do all that work, because I didn't. So that's the gist of the wall. I hope that's answered a bunch of questions for you. Like I said, I really encourage you to go steep with it. Just build volumes out of scrap. I've got a video on building the volumes. You can start with jugs and you'll work into some other stuff. It'll be okay. That's the way to do it. I say I've got some bolt hangers in here that I can use to hang draws on and practice lead climbing a little bit. I'm not going to lead climb it. It's more or less hang here and hang draws and practice hanging rope in it. Stuff like that. A little bit of endurance training. There's a lot you can do with the wall. I wasn't convinced of how useful a 8x12 wall would be until I bounced around on a tension board a while back. And that tension board wore me out, and it sold me on this concept. So I'm on board now. I'm going to start casting some screw-ons so I can use more of this board effectively and start casting some more holes, fill it up. So I hope this answers some of your questions. I hope this gets you a start. Feel free to reach out and ask questions. We're here to help. We want you to enjoy your wall. We don't want it to fall on you. So reach out and ask questions. There's a great home wall building Facebook group out there. That's probably where you saw this to begin with because you were searching. Ask questions. We're here to help. So thank you so much, and good luck out there.